plus with the excavations there. And then maybe as setting the context, mention these other areas that she worked in. She certainly worked for other civil rights, and she worked for programs that would help Native American people who were dealing with alcoholism.
Yep. Okay. Maria appears to be a very strong-willed person. How would you place her stand for the Iowa Burial Act in historical context with what was happening in the 70s, 80s?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think we always need to look for those sorts of contexts, so I was glad to see that question on your list. You know, you need to look at that era in terms of the civil rights movements of the 60s, and some of it anticipated in the 50s. This was the era of black power, of red power, of women's rights, the movements that black and red were beautiful. I mean, because before that, Native Americans and blacks, in my observation, and specifically with some individual friends I had, you know, they did not emphasize these identities. There were Native Americans who qualified by blood quantum or enrollment who didn't necessarily advertise that. It wasn't something that was popular. I mean, after all, blacks and Native Americans were barred from restaurants, barred from certain public facilities. I certainly remember that when I was working in South Dakota in the 1950s. The Native American boys, young men, I mean, we were young teenagers at the time, they could not go with us into restaurants in Chamberlain, South Dakota. And so those of us that weren't Native Americans, we said, well, we're not going to go in those restaurants either. I just found this shocking. And they were not allowed, the Native American kids weren't allowed to go with us to the swimming pool in Chamberlain. And so we said, you know, well, to heck with that, we'll just go swim. Everybody, we can all swim in the reservoir. Nobody's going to tell us we can't swim there. So people were coming out of their closets, you might say, in terms of race and religion and gender. Vine Deloria, who incidentally, Vine Deloria Jr. was did his undergraduate work here at Iowa State University. Don't know if you knew that or not. But he had written his book, Custer Died for Your Sins, and his book, We Talk, You Listen. Betty Friedan had written The Feminine Mystique, which had a big impact. The autobiography of Malcolm X was published, and so people, blacks and Native Americans, women, and to some degree Latinos in that era were finding their voices and being proud of their identifications. So Maria fit right into that.
So in your writing, you kind of talk about Maria's work before the establishment of NAGPRA. What was her role at the national level? And we call this the so what factor. So what was important about what she stood for, and what do we see that's happening because of the stand that she took?
Well, I mean, she was one of the activists that was giving lectures and presentations at a national level. She attended meetings of the Society for American Archaeology, I believe the American Anthropological Association, also internationally the World Archaeological Conference. And I think this was extremely important in recognizing human rights and diversity. And you may agree or disagree with me, but having asked the question, I think her work was especially important, and that what comes around goes around is coming around again with the president-elect, who is poised, to attack and roll back American Indian achievements, and is attacking diversity and the dignity of rights of American Indians. There's, in terms of other people too, in terms of race, religion, and gender and national origin. The president-elect has said in some instances that he would consider bringing back the horrid termination policies of the 1940s and 1940s to 1960s, where the federal government attempted to abrogate treaty rights and terminate tribal status, even in the face of treaties. And he has said that he was against Indian casinos, because of course they compete with his casinos, and making statements like, well, the people that run these casinos that own them don't even look like Indians, which shows a total lack of knowledge and respect for American history and American diversity. So I feel very strongly that what she did was a clarion call to those times and to these times. If she were alive today, she would be up at Standing Rock.
Yeah. Yep.